Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mark Skidmore. I'm the director of the North Central Regional Center for Rural Development. And welcome to today's webinar. The title of the webinar is Expanding the Intelligent Community Extension Program. So the webinar is going to showcase some results of a project looking at communities that implemented their intelligent community checklists and the different ways that that sort of worked out and planned. Several educators in Indiana and Nebraska were also trained along the lines of intelligent community design. The speaker today is Dr. Roberto Gallardo from Purdue Extension and the Purdue Center for Rural Development. Roberto is the assistant director of the center and a Purdue Extension Community and Regional Economics Specialist. He holds a degree in electrical engineering, a master's degree in economic development, and a PhD in public policy and administration. So with that, I'd like to welcome Roberto. Before we get started, I just wanted to note that we have a couple of upcoming webinars that I hope you'll keep in mind. There's also a little questionnaire that you can fill out, which helps us and helps our speaker with where you are and your interest in these things. And with that, I will pass it on to Roberto. Roberto will be tracking any comments or questions that you have, and will either address them along the way as he sees them or maybe at the end. So with that, thanks so much for being here. And Roberto, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me? I'm hoping. Thank you, Mark, Crystal. This has been a very fun project. So I appreciate you filling out the quick question we had at the beginning if to answer if your community has any digital inclusion strategies as part of their overall economic development efforts. I'm thrilled to see that about 42%, 43% said yes. Not sure and no is the majority, but still it's good that three of the seven that have responded did say yes. So we're gonna get started. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to write them in the chat box, and we'll be glad to address those. First and foremost, well, thank you obviously to the North Central Regional Center for Rural Development that made this study possible. Without their support, this would have not been possible to expand the program. And I'm going to give you a little bit more background later on. And I also want to take advantage to kind of clarify. I've gotten some feedback about the title of the program and perhaps how it could portray or sound a little bit kind of elitist and so forth. So I wanted just to clarify that this concept is from a worldwide think tank called the Intelligent Community Forum, and it's basically called this way to distinguish from another concept that's around a lot called smart cities. Smart cities are those that implement Internet of Things to kind of streamline services, reduce cost, become a little bit more efficient. And the concept behind intelligent is to distinguish of smart, not assuming that some communities are dumb. It's more so to say that an intelligent community is much more than a smart community, where an intelligent community could incorporate some smart city strategies, but it is much broader than that. So I just wanted to clarify that from the get-go. Today we're gonna cover a little bit of a background of what the digital age is, why this program I think it's important. I will then provide a quick overview of what the program is, and then we're gonna zero into the study and the results. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to type in the chat box. So let me start by I like this stat that to reach 100 million users worldwide, it took the telephone 75 years. The majority of those were obviously building the infrastructure, but still, it took 75 years to get 100 million users to adopt the telephone. The mobile phone, it took 16. The World Wide Web, it took 7. Facebook, it took 4 years to reach 100 million users. Instagram, it took 2 years. And then Pokemon Go, it took 1 month. And obviously, the amount of time is going down drastically, and more people are really adopting the technology. Another point in case is the this image here that shows the Vatican when Pope John Paul II passed in 2005, and then again in 8 years later when Pope Francis was about to deliver his first speech as Pope. You can see the difference. There is a bunch of screens. But obviously, don't be too harsh, because you can see that there is a flip phone there in 2005. I don't know if you recall trying to text or send an email, even though that was not possible, but texting on a flip phone was really an interesting ordeal. This kind of just shows quickly, that digital technology is being adopted rather quickly. And of course, this has some implications, as we're going to find out later on. Uh, the Bureau of Economic Analyses is in a very conservative way attempting to measure the digital economy. It's a moving target. It's not like set in stone in by any means, and it's very conservative, I think. But it's an attempt to measure it. And so, as of 2017, it was about 5.1 million jobs directly from the digital economy. I believe they identified about 40 to 45 industries, maybe. I would have to go back into the fine print and kind of see what exactly they're measuring, but it amounted to $1.35 trillion of the U.S. economy, or about 7%. And the average compensation was of around $132,000. The median household income in the U.S. is 60 or so, 59. So it's double that. And the kicker here is that you don't necessarily need to be in those dense urban areas to benefit from the digital economy. Obviously, not all the sectors are going to benefit from this, but still, as the economy and workforce continue to digitize, you're going to contribute to this number. So that's another stat that I wanted to share with you all today. Another study came out from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, their tech division or department, in partnership with Amazon. So the results have to be interpreted with a grain of salt. However, based on my work, anecdotal with real businesses, I think it's pretty clear, and it's pretty close to what this study found, that if suddenly all the potential of rural businesses, the digital potential, were unleashed, it would contribute about $47 billion to the U.S. economy every year. And it would generate in the next, in the first 3 years of this unleashing this potential, 360,000 jobs. So most of these would be in rural communities that, as we know, those of us that work with rural communities, it is a significant number. So this, obviously, Amazon has a vested interest in everybody using their platform, blah, blah, blah. But still, I think the methodology is solid enough to kind of discuss these stats. It is not being unleashed, however, because there is not adequate digital connectivity in rural areas. That the talent pipeline of candidates that could work in these moms and pops is not there. And many times these moms and pops do not know to ask or look for digital skills among their potential employees. So that's a big one. And lastly, some of these businesses are simply not adopting digital strategies and digital, services and so forth. So those are the three main barriers as to why these numbers are not being unleashed. And so again, we're going to go back to this later on, but this is something interesting to share with you. We did a study. My colleagues from Ag Econ here at Purdue did a phenomenal study that, in fact, was cited by the Indiana governor last year or 2 years ago to justify investing $100 million in rural broadband. And the reason was because on average there was about for every dollar invested in rural broadband, the local economy got back 4 on average. It was based on co-ops, on REMCs, so it's an average there, but still the authors acknowledge that it's one of the highest ratios they've seen. And the two key drivers of this were telemedicine and adult education. Again, uh, internet may have started as an entertainment tool, but now it is really becoming more and more important and critical. So this is a very interesting ROI, and so if you need that kind of stat to kind of convince some folks in your communities as to why invest in rural broadband, please drop me a line and I'll be happy to share this study with you. I'm sure the rural portions of your states are very similar to Indiana. So, but telemedicine and adult education were the two main drivers of this high ROI based on the study we completed. And here's a very interesting graph. This one shows that the average distance has tripled among inventors. And this is interesting because everybody talks about an innovation and the need to be in very dense urban areas to kind of be able to really, really innovate. Well, there's a couple studies that have come out. One from the Northeasterns from Stefan Getz, found that the innovation is more widespread than what we would like to think. Another study that we did as well, part of that same kind of funding mechanism, with my colleague Brian Whitaker from Oklahoma State, we also found that rural businesses are innovative. They're just not being measured in the same way. But regardless, this shows that, in fact, the distance between these folks it has tripled. There are many reasons for this. Some of these may still be in larger urban areas, but the point is the potential. I know that many of my urban counterparts argue, that they have seen this before, the death of distance, and that did result in much change. However, back in the day, the internet was a lot less sophisticated, right? When they were talking about the death of distance, they were really talking about email and fax machines. Now it's a lot more sophisticated than that. So it's a potential. I'm not saying it's going to play out, but there are some numbers that are starting to show kind of where this is going. So this is really interesting. However, we have a problem, right? And as you all know, rural broadband infrastructure is a problem. Internet adoption rates in urban areas is also a problem, especially among those low income areas. But this is just unacceptable. In 2020, our farmers are struggling to connect, and they contribute farms that contribute 80 billion to the U.S. GDP. They run unlimited internet connections. 1/3 of them said that lack of internet affected their equipment purchases. Some purchase equipment and with all the bells and whistles, and they can't really truly leverage this because connectivity is an issue. So all this potential that I just shared with you, and some indicators that are starting to indicate that economic activity and innovation can really truly be a little bit more widespread rather than concentrate in dense urban areas. It's hard to play out because of these connectivity issues and others. Workforce development is also going to be impacted big time. 1/3 of U.S. workers are expected to shift occupational categories in 10 years. If your local community does not have adequate connectivity, or workers do not have the decent foundational or the basic foundational digital skills, they're going to struggle to reskill. And so that's important because, again, 1/3 are going to be displaced and are going to have to shift occupations. So not all of them will require a broadband connection and digital skills, but I'm guessing at least more than half of these will require this infrastructure and these skills to be able to kind of shift their occupations and reskill and so forth. So there's a tremendous workforce development implication. And another front, this one is kind of old, 4 years old, but still very, very significant, where half of U.S. adults back then considered themselves unprepared. Traditional learners are reluctant when it came to digital readiness. So that's only 17% were they said they were digitally ready. So this is again very important to keep in mind because all this is going to play a very key role as our communities continue to transition into this digital mindset. So it's important to keep that in mind uh, as well. Let me so what can be done? Well, there's multiple things, but the first thing is we've got to start thinking in terms of digital inclusion. Um, there are many definitions of digital inclusion, but the one that I really like is this one. It's all about the meaningful use of the technology for social and economic benefits. I know that some folks may look at digital inclusion and think about targeting those that are less fortunate. Yes, that's part of being digital inclusive, but to me, it is broader than that. It is ensuring that your workers have the skills, right, and the connectivity, that your businesses have the capacity to compete in the digital age, that the homework gap, meaning that your students don't go home expected to go online and they can't. All this is really revolving around digital inclusion. And to me, as a community developer, I think it's critical that we start thinking of incorporating digital inclusive strategies into these wider community development efforts. That's kind of the first step that you can take as a community development practitioner to really start helping your community around this situation. The digital divide, which is a first cousin of digital inclusion, or in fact, digital exclusion, is a result in part of the digital divide, uh, has been evolving, right? Back in the day, it was all about first level divide, what's called, access, yes, no, period. Do you have access, yes or no? Now it's evolving a little bit more from a research perspective, more into okay, wait a minute, you have access, uh, but how are you using it and why are you using it that way? So the second level divide looks more at differences in technology use, not necessarily internet, but just the technology, digital technology. And then the third one is uh, do these differences in use do they lead to different economic, cultural, social, and personal outcomes? In fact, there is a researcher from Europe that just coined digital capital, and I think that could be one more capital to add to if you're familiar to the community uh, capital frameworks. Digital capital is the ability to really translate online benefits into offline benefits and all that it entails. But that's where we are right now. It's the meaningful use of the technology and looking at how the term or the concept is evolving from a research perspective. I think it's pretty important for us to start looking at this. Unfortunately, many rural communities are still stuck in that first level divide kind of concept where I understand infrastructure is an issue, but they totally overlook the larger piece of digital inclusion. So to kind of put it a little bit more into perspective, um, the National Digital Inclusion Alliance, which I'm part of, as a disclaimer, I'm a board member. But if you can join this awesome alliance, I think you will learn a lot. It's nonprofits and it's local governments and it's practitioners that are involved in digital inclusion efforts across the country. But this NDIA identifies 5 dimensions of digital inclusion. Obviously, the first one is affordable and robust broadband, internet enabled devices that meet the needs of users. Many times, we may have only access to a mobile device, and research is pretty clear that if that is the case, you are not truly leveraging the technology like you could or should. Digital literacy training is another key one. Quality technical support. Many folks, especially older folks, may be hesitant because they don't feel they have the technical assistance needed for them to adopt these applications and devices, and also small business owners. They're busy running their business, and they may not feel comfortable enough. So quality technical support is very important. And last but not least is applications and content. That encourage participation, collaboration, self-sufficiency, etc. That part is really one that we need to work a lot more, especially in rural communities. Most of the applications that we end up adopting here in rural communities tend to be urban focused and urban inspired. So we need to start thinking, why can't we produce our rural focused, rural inspired content and applications? I think that would be a game changer. So these are the 5 dimensions. And again, unfortunately, in many rural development circles, we only focus on number 1 and we're overlooking the other 4. And if your community is not digital inclusive, I think that's the number 1 threat to community economic development today. So that's kind of where we are on the digital inclusion. So any questions or comments before I pivot to talk more about the program itself, the Intelligent Community Extension Program? That again, I want to just clarify about the name Intelligent. This does not assume or imply that there are communities that are dumb. Not at all. It's more to distinguish from the smart city concept, where it's more on the IoT. Intelligent community is more holistic, as I'm going to cover shortly. Any questions or comments thus far on the implications on digital inclusion, community development, and kind of the digital age trends that I've shared with you? I guess not. Okay. So we'll continue. So what is the Intelligent Community Extension Program? Uh, uh, the Intelligent Community Extension Program, let me go ahead and cover this already. Well, show the animation here. So it started in Mississippi. I started my career in Mississippi. That's where we were piloting this. I also reached out to my wonderful colleagues in Nebraska, and we've been kind of kicking this concept idea of how can we kind of embed digital inclusion strategies into a wider community development effort, and the result of that thinking was the Intelligent Community Extension Program. The intelligent community is one that, whether through crisis or foresight, understands the enormous challenges of the digital age and takes conscious steps to prosper in it. They're not reactive, they're more so proactive. So if you fit this criteria, you're considered intelligent. Again, not assuming or implying that others are dumb just because they don't grasp this concept. That's not what the name implies. And it uses 6 indicators. The Intelligent Community Forum is the one that developed this. They are a worldwide, a global think tank. And notice that 4 of these 6 indicators are really traditional, what could be considered traditional economic development indicators. However, we do add a broadband connectivity and digital equity. And when you add those 2 ingredients, and then you reassess your community with these 6 indicators, you will find a different community. You will see a different community. And that I've seen with the more than 20 or 30 communities that I've worked with across the country to some form or fashion through this process. That's what you kind of see. This one to me has been the best way to, and I hate this academic word, but to operationalize that digital inclusion kind of concept, more so from a community development perspective. This is the best way I've found to do so, is to embed this into a self-help community development approach, asset mapping. And so the first thing you've got to do is increase awareness, talk about the trends, the potential, what communities are missing, right? Communities don't know what they don't know, and they are busy running the community, the leaders are, and so they may not be very much aware of what's happening, why the socioeconomic, or how quickly the socioeconomic landscape is really digitizing and changing. So increase awareness, form a task force. These could be swapped. This is what you could have a task force first with a key group of leaders that you've identified that are kind of conducive or interested in this topic, and then you increase awareness through presentations and informal conversations and so forth. And if the community decides to move forward, then you can complete a checklist, which is online. I did publish a Journal of Extension article last year, 2 years ago, I can't remember, where I kind of discuss the main findings from the Mississippi experience, which allowed me to then replicate this in a couple communities in Nebraska and a couple communities in Indiana. But once you complete the checklist, you get an idea of where the gaps are, where the assets are, and then you execute and document. And then towards the end, which is way down the road, it's more of an outcome perhaps, or the cherry on the cake, is you recognize you could nominate these communities to be considered the intelligent community of the year, or and so forth. But that to me is really the icing on the cake. The actual cake is more on the awareness part and identifying assets that you did not know you had from this digital kind of mindset situation. So that's what the intelligent community program is all about. Is go through that using this framework of 6 indicators embedded into the self-help asset mapping approach to community development, and you go through these steps to kind of get these communities really to change their mindset. As we all know, community development takes time, but once they realize it kind of clicks, the community can take it from there. It was designed this way. So this again, and it also helps create demand for other potential programs that you may have within extension or non-extension that otherwise may be hard for the community to kind of run, take and run with it. I've seen it. If you embed it under this overall umbrella, I think it makes it easier for them to come back and say, by the way, these are the gaps that we found, but here are some extension resources that can help. Some of these may be Utah's program remote work certification. It could be the digital ready business. It could be the iFront door that we've developed, and I'm going to talk more about that later on. But the key thing that I want to mention about this process is it is community driven. Extension plays more of a resource facilitator guide. Extension could be the key person beating the drum on this, or it could be the mayor, or it could be the local economic developer, and extension kind of is facilitating the process. It is community driven. It is again based on asset mapping, so it tells the communities what they do have, not necessarily what they're lacking. And so I think it's been a very interesting process thus far. I've been tweaking it and learning with every community that I work with. So I just wanted to kind of give you an overview of what this program is all about. Because of this funding from NCRCRD, is that now we are. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the study and then the findings. So what the study proposed is to, because again in my work and my limited work with some Nebraska communities through other grants, other funding, especially the Rural Futures Institute, and here in Indiana with a couple planning commissions that were interested in this, is that we were able to complete the checklist or the report. And so the study really asked NCRCRD, let us implement this community checklist, and the community identified priorities from this checklist, these recommendations. Let's implement and see what do they gravitate towards, and how can that inform tweaking the process even further down the road. So that's exactly what we did. We selected 4 communities, 2 in Indiana and 2 in Nebraska, that again, the 2 in Nebraska were involved in another project that, by the way, resulted in a program that also kind of supports this overall effort, but I'm going to talk about that later. So that's what we did. And then they went through their checklist and said, you know what, if you do have funding available, we would like the money for these kind of projects. And based on that, we learned, okay, so these are kind of the things based in these rural contexts that they're more likely to kind of request. So how can we incorporate that into the training? So that's really what we did. We fine-tuned the program and we incorporated these funding patterns and implemented the feedback, and then I turned around and trained 10 extension educators, 6 in Nebraska, 4 in Indiana, and 2 external stakeholders in Nebraska, and I'm going to cover that shortly. But that's the crux of the study. Is we had the checklist, we had some money, okay, community, within your context, within your awareness, what do you need funded? And that helped in turn inform, okay, how can we better tweak the program as we train more folks down the road? That's kind of the gist of the project. Uh, so some of the results here. We had we worked again with 4 communities that had completed a checklist. We budgeted up to 4,000 for each to implement the checklist action items. These action items were identified by the community based on their priorities, the resources, whatever. We did have nothing to do with that. They selected that from a list of recommendations that in turn were selected based on how they completed the checklist. Um, Ravenna, Nebraska, which is a phenomenal small community in Nebraska, received almost the $4,000. Richmond, Indiana, which along with Union City, Indiana, which were the 2 communities here in Indiana, they partnered. They said, you know what, can we, they're close together. We want to do this a regional effort. And they did. And then the fourth community in Nebraska unfortunately dropped out, which was a lesson learned because obviously, as we all know, there are other issues. There are staff limitations, there are time limitations. So that was a lesson learned that I'm going to cover shortly. But they dropped out, so their funding was put back towards this regional effort. So all in all, we had budgeted 16,000. We got 12,000 to the region in Indiana, and then we got 4,000 to Ravenna in Nebraska. So now I'm going to share with you what they focused on. All the communities really selected items under knowledge workforce, which was not surprising in a way. We all know from a public policy perspective, if you can frame anything around workforce development, it gets the policymakers' attention. So, not surprisingly, these communities did find among the recommendations under the knowledge workforce indicator of the Intelligent Community Framework, they kind of zeroed in on those. But Ravenna, Nebraska also asked some money for advocacy, which is another of the indicators, and so that was very interesting. Ravenna, Nebraska came up with something kind of similar to what's called a conveyor belt. They requested money under knowledge workforce, again, a recommendation that they selected, to implement an entrepreneurship curriculum. But not only that, they also tried to get some sort of makerspace equipment, not a full-blown makerspace, but some sort of makerspace equipment into the high school initially to perhaps help these entrepreneurs that were going to go through the program, that perhaps they needed some of this makerspace for some of their prototypes or some of their business ideas. And then they also requested money to beef up their shop local online platform. So as you can see, they were very holistic in the way they approached this because they kind of designed this conveyor belt. Well, let's teach these folks entrepreneurship. They may need some sort of makerspace, and then perhaps they also need a platform to sell. So that's kind of the approach that Ravenna followed, which was fascinating to me. That's kind of what they focused on, which was really, really interesting. Eastern Indiana, they went, it's totally under knowledge workforce. They said, we've been trying to get a regional robotics program off the ground. And because that was one of the recommendations based on the checklist they completed, they said, we're going to launch a regional robotics program. So kind of that's the gist of what each of these communities did with when they received funding to do this. So here is some pictures of what Eastern Indiana did. I am told that this May they will hold their first ever regional robotics competition, which is phenomenal. Again, they were kind of thinking about it, but this process really was the thing that pushed them overboard and said, you know what, let's do this. And so again, it helps kind of either solidify or create demand for some stuff that you may have going on in your community that may lack a larger umbrella to latch on. So that's what happened here. They purchased 30 robots. They've worked with 10 schools. They launched 5 new robotics programs. They expanded existing programs. They've reached approximately 120 students. and they secured $2,000 from a private sector company to help them leverage the money that the NCRCRD provided. So again, it's a win-win, right? The private sector chimed in. They said, you know what, this is important. They've got a plan, right? They've got the checklist, they've got the action plan, and they've got additional funding. So let's pitch in $2,000, and you can see just the pictures of the kids are just priceless. And it feels very, very good to see that you're impacting and changing lives that way. Uh, Here is the Ravenna. That's their shop where you live directory. 11 students completed their entrepreneurship. They purchased 3 makerspace equipment. It was initially placed in the school, but then it was moved out to the library, where hopefully there will be a permanent makerspace. It also helped this laser cutter fundraising was already in play when they participated in this project. So again, it kind of strengthened that, it leveraged that, and so it helped kind of get an additional $17,000 for the laser cutter. And 11 businesses have organized and utilized the shop where I live. Not all of them started through the entrepreneurship, so it's an added resource for other businesses in the community. One of the business owners or entrepreneurs did use a laser cutter to print or do some sort of promotional material for their business. So again, it's kind of this very cool concept of, okay, let's teach them entrepreneurship skills. Let's then provide them some sort of makerspace equipment if they need it, and then let's also provide them with an online platform for them to sell. So that's a very, very cool example here with Nebraska. So what were the lessons learned for the program? Tweaking the program. Well, we learned a lot. This coupled with what I already had learned in Mississippi and to a limited extent here in Indiana. It's really not only all about awareness. U.S. community developers may already know this as well. It's local capacity matters too. Even if you may have a very, very cool idea, maybe some funding, many times the local capacity may not be there. And so you've got to be familiar with it. So to me, it was not necessarily that they don't know what they don't know. It's more so they don't have the bandwidth, right? And so that was important. So we made sure to incorporate that into the training materials. Again, the program itself provides a bigger picture. It kind of provides the forest when many times we're trying to sell trees, but we fail to sell the forest, right? And so this program has shown that it can help with other community development efforts when you show them kind of the larger picture. It does have potential for demand for extension and non-extension. Again, the robotics effort in Eastern Indiana, that's the best example. They were thinking about it. They just didn't have any traction underneath, and this kind of helped in that respect. Obviously, collaborate and partner with everybody that you can. If you're an extension educator and you're already spread thin, perhaps you can help recruit somebody else, a local champion that can take the lead in this program. And anything around workforce development and entrepreneurship will get some traction. That's what we learned from the funding patterns. And we're trying to build this online community around this program. So those are that are kind of guinea pigs pushing this out there in our extension worlds. We're hoping to start building and solidifying an online community around this process to kind of share best practices, lessons learned, et cetera, et cetera. That's what we learned through this process to make, and we made sure we incorporated into the training material. Let me speed up here. So we developed training materials. Initially, we were going to do face-to-face training, but then we realized it would be better because of our online community kind of objective to record the webinars, and these could be scaled up a lot easier. So there are 5 webinars that explain this process with the tweaking that I discussed in the previous slide. So we conducted and recorded 5 one-hour webinars to kind of provide a little more detail on how this program operates. We did 10 extension educators trained, 6 in Nebraska, 4 in Indiana, and then 2 external organizations from our Nebraska colleagues were part of this as well. They were also Nebraska Information Technology Commission and the Nebraska Library Commission. It shows how the local champions or the key leaders for this process do not necessarily have to be extension, which is also very good. Again, some extension colleagues are already spread thin. So if you're interested in extension, you may introduce this and maybe kind of shift it over to somebody else in the community. That's something that you may want to consider if you want your community to kind of go through this process with this kind of mindset change in mind. Moving forward, so expanding the ICEP, I'm sorry, I skipped a slide there. One checklist report was completed by one of the graduates of this program in Indiana. It is being implemented as we speak. Because of this, this process started in 2 more communities, and there's an additional 2 more communities that may jumpstart this or may begin this process rather soon. And I was told by my Nebraska colleagues that some components of this program, either the awareness side or the checklist or some of the recommendations that were learned throughout the process were utilized at a Central Development District meeting in Nebraska. So again, that's one of the key findings that I'm going to share with you shortly. So these are the results of expanding this Intelligent Community Extension Program in Indiana and Nebraska. So moving forward, we learned, and I really hoped that the program would do this, is be flexible. You don't have to do all the steps. You may pick some of the components and run with them and embed them into a larger community development effort, perhaps. I know that many communities are tired of running through these programs, and so we found that the program is very flexible and modular in a way that you can take bits and pieces and incorporate them into other processes already existing in the community. I think that's a key lesson learned here. Moving forward, don't think, oh my God, I have to do the whole thing. Well, if you see a part of it that may help in another project that you're doing or program, I think the program lends itself to do that. We need obviously buy-in from extension personnel. I know bandwidth is limited, but as mentioned earlier, it doesn't have to be you as an extension. It could be you initiating this, but then turning it over to a core group of folks that may be interested in it. We found that to be very, very cool. And we also need additional extension programming that can support this effort. So many times we come through the checklist and the asset mapping and we identify gaps. That has inspired me to develop additional programming within extension that can help fill those gaps. But I'm sure that other areas may have these things going on. So for example, the remote work again in Utah, that fits perfectly under this scenario. Obviously, we have an iFront Door program here that we're also replicating in Nebraska. That was born because of this process back in Mississippi, actually. So there is a lot of room to identify areas where extension can develop programming to help address those gaps. And if extension doesn't have the capacity to do so, or it's not in their wheelhouse or whatever, I am sure there may be other online resources out there that you can then turn around and tell the community, look, these are the gaps we found, but hey, these are things you can do to address those gaps. I think that's pretty cool. And the last bullet point is the one I emphasize a lot all the time because I get that question. Many communities, in my experience, as I explained earlier today, go down the rabbit hole of infrastructure and they don't come out. And that's unfortunate because there's a lot more that can be done to help, especially change that mindset. And so you do not need ultra fast connectivity or adequate connectivity or connectivity to change your mindset. And this program is all about changing the mindset. Now, yes, there is a component that talks about broadband connectivity, but many communities immediately think this is all about infrastructure, and they are discouraged right off the bat incorrectly because they think, well, my connectivity is terrible. This will not be useful. No, that's wrong. It can be useful. It can be parallel to connectivity. In fact, it can help mobilize and kind of activate some dormant assets for the infrastructure side. It's much broader than infrastructure. That's the key thing that we've got to keep in mind, that this program is not about broadband infrastructure, and it's more about the community kind of perceiving or understanding the forest and not going down the rabbit hole of infrastructure, which, as you all know, and you may be familiar with it or not, infrastructure is many times not in the control of the community either. And if you've managed to get a broadband action team in place or something, and these energetic folks start going through the broadband planning part on the infrastructure side, it may fizzle because you're at the mercy of the providers. And this program can help them explain and see that there are other things that they can do, like knowledge workforce and entrepreneurship and robotics and other things that they do control, while also keeping their eye on the infrastructure. I'm not saying to just play dead on that side. But so this is a useful program to increase awareness and get the community moving on changing their mindset. I guess it's my main conclusion. And with that, I'm gonna be quiet. I'm at 46 minutes. I think I'm over 1 minute, right, Crystal? Mark?
Oh, you're fine. You're fine. We'd love to have any questions or comments that you can chat in the chat box down below. And while we're waiting for people to input anything there, it'd be great if you could fill out this form. And Roberto, I'll ask a question because we're all in the middle of this right now. MSU just canceled classes and is making plans to send students home if they're able to go home. Some of them are in rural areas, and our backup plan for holding classes is to use this technology, Zoom, to reach the students. And so I don't know what Ohio State is doing. I think, isn't Purdue's classes closed as well?
Correct. We were notified yesterday. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm just, in terms of thinking about, do some of these communities have the bandwidth to allow students to access their classes if they're asked to go home, but yet are still expected to attend class via Zoom?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Mark. And unfortunately, I think that this public health crisis is going to show glaringly that this is still an issue, right? That there is inadequate connectivity, not only in rural communities, but also in low-income neighborhoods where, some of these students may live. And they're going to go back home, and they're not going to be able to participate through no fault of their own. And remote work and telework is now, work from home is now kind of these big buzzwords, where those of us in the field have been known about this, and have been pushing and whatever. And now everybody's going to be like, oh shoot, I can't work from home. So yeah, I think this public health crisis is going to kind of showcase, unfortunately, that we still have a lot of work to do.
Thanks.
I've got a question. Yeah, I've got a question here. Who were the local community partners beyond the library? We have in my work, we've sometimes it's the mayor, the part-time mayor, by the way. Other times is the local economic development organization, the local economic developer. So other times it's just a community volunteer that is passionate. Those are some of the key partners that we found kind of beat the drum along with the extension educator. Many times in some other communities, there is no extension educator with a community development appointment or even an ag or whatever, but the specialist may be able to connect with somebody locally and then turn it over to them. Hopefully does that answer your question? Paul, yeah, I knew you were going to be asking something, my friend. How might we implement this program in our state if we have willing extension faculty and volunteers? Contact me, and I'll be willing to share with you the training material. You can go over the webinars, and I can coach you as you go through them. And then once you're done, it's really pick up and run with it. and then just circle back through the online community. So reach out to me, Paul, and that's precisely why this grant was sought, is to develop the materials so we can scale it throughout the Midwest and the country, hopefully. So yeah, reach out to me. I don't know if there are any other questions, comments.
I see that Paul is typing. We'll hold off for that. Okay, there's a question.
How many hours is the training? So it's a 5 1 hour webinars. So it's five right off the cusp, and then perhaps an additional five to meet with me so I can explain a little bit more details and kind of best practices and lesson learned. So it's really not very intensive. Again, it's designed to be light in a way, and it's designed to be community driven. So that kind of takes off a lot of training requirements on the extension side, on the extension end. So if you can plan around 10 hours of training, I think that should be sufficient. How do you develop local champions? Uh, well, so what we've done in the past is through other extension programming. If the community is working on broadband infrastructure, for example, that's the perfect way to introduce this program, and hopefully you'll be able to find a local champion that is willing to pick this up and run with it. Other times, you may hear by word of mouth. The local economic developer may give you a call and say, you know what, I heard about this. Uh, Help me out here. How to actually develop a local champion, that's a webinar in and of itself. But in this particular case, Hibbard, it really works through word of mouth or informal conversations. Again, the program is not very intensive. It's not very heavy in a way like other extension programs. So it's not, and it's easily incorporated into a larger strategy. So if you already have something else going on and you want to make sure that the community is digital inclusive, you can easily attach this program to it.
Well, I think maybe that's a really good spot to stop for this afternoon. Thanks everyone for joining the webinar. Thank you, Roberto, for sharing your project with us. Really great stuff. And
Thank
with
you.
that, yeah, you bet. We'll close off for today and see you again.